don't want to and can't stay on the sidelines of history. European authorities who have invested too much in the Ukrainian conflict are trying hard to get involved in the negotiation process. Indeed, if Brussels obediently wags its tail now, it will lose not only the remnants of its reputation, but will also have to invest in rebuilding the country it helped destroy. In Europe, they understand perfectly well that they might not be able to bear such a burden, so they are doing everything they can to prolong the war in an attempt to secure a place not as winners, but at least not as losers. It's no surprise that a whole camp of war instigators came to Kiev for the Support Ukraine summit. If not by action, then at least by words.
No one wants peace more than the Ukrainian people, but they want a just and lasting peace. And that is achieved only through strength. That's why we are strengthening your economy. That's why we are enhancing the resilience of your energy sector. That's why we will continue training and equipping your troops.
And that's why we will continue killing your people, she forgot to add. No, of course, these circus performers promised Kiev a lot, just so they wouldn't lay down their arms. They will give loans, shells, and of course they didn't forget about the Euromaidan dream of EU membership. They even named a date, saying everything will be done by 2030. With such foresight, Klitschko's wise words are very timely.
And today, not everyone can look into tomorrow. Or rather, not everyone can look, few can do it.
But this is just a small part of the European performance. An interesting show unfolded at the UN General Assembly meeting. They unexpectedly adopted 2 resolutions on Ukraine. In short, one condemns Russia, the other doesn't. The latter, by the way, is from the USA. And Washington demanded that allies in Kiev withdraw the European version in favor of theirs. But a demonstrative démarche occurred, and it's not surprising. After the promised manna from heaven by friends, the authorities of the independent state were so inspired that they decided not to follow the US lead. However, later, at the UN Security Council meeting, whose decisions are binding, the American resolution was adopted.
It's clear that Europe's militarism is the only player on the international stage today that wants the war to continue and opposes any realistic initiatives to resolve the conflict. The text adopted now is not perfect, but it is essentially the first attempt to adopt a constructive and future-oriented product of the Council, speaking of a path to peace rather than inflaming the conflict.
However, don't think that all Europeans are fools. Showing teeth is just a cunning plan to distract attention. Such ardent pro-Ukrainians as Poland, the Baltics, corrupt Eurocrats, and other short-sighted ones continue to growl at the US and Russia. But there are always those who, as they say, play both sides. The sworn friends from the 100 Years' War decided to start a pilgrimage to Trump. And the first on this list was the Frenchman Macron. He clearly tried to convince the White House leader not to brandish a saber and not to leave Paris in trouble, using methods one might use when trying to get something from a spouse. At one point, the blue-blooded leader placed his hand on Trump's knee, but he rejected the US president's reciprocal, ironic gesture. After all, Macron's limbs are only for his wife. Trump, of course, didn't appreciate such familiarity and pointed out the Frenchman's place as a lesson. He seated Macron at the edge of his table during a video meeting at the G7 summit, although usually heads of state are seated at a round table at such meetings. However, the lesson from the elder benefited Macron. He quickly changed his stance and unexpectedly spoke about possible negotiations with the Kremlin. I stopped communicating with Putin after the events in Bucha because I felt we couldn't achieve anything from him at that time. Now we have a chance. Big changes have occurred because a new US administration has come. So it's a new context. The British Starmer also prepared for a visit to Trump. He decided not to anger the American boss and went not empty-handed, but with great news that he would meet the White House's demands and increase the country's defense budget to 3% in the future, at the expense of others but for his own benefit. This is good for our national security. It's also good for our government's mission to restore economic growth, and we should look at this with optimism. But funding is only possible by making tough decisions. And in this case, it means we will reduce our aid spending to other countries to 0.3% of GDP. The only one who seems not to have figured out what's happening is the future German Chancellor. Friedrich Merz seems oblivious to the drastic changes in the world. He continues to repeat his campaign mantra about supporting Ukraine, anti-Russia, and the greatness of Germany, which is no longer there, and of course, independence from the US. For me, it will be an absolute priority to strengthen Europe as soon as possible so that it gradually truly achieves independence from the US. After Trump's statements last week, it's clear that Americans, this part of Americans, this government, largely don't care about Europe's fate. But, looking at people like Merz, it becomes clear that they don't care about Europe either. Their own pockets are closer to their hearts. Of course, now the successor to Merkel's tradition can promise say anything, but the reality is that the US, Russia, and China are the three power centers that united can dictate their terms to the whole world. And in this story, even connections with the deep state in the form of the BlackRock Corporation won't help. But we'll see.